This is a true story. A black man who was humiliated and humiliated in a white world where racial discrimination is serious. Fight for a huge commercial empire. If you really need an inspirational movie now, please be patient to finish this story. He may change your life. Under the hat is a black man who wipes his shoes. He purposely put the stall in front of the bank so that he can serve the rich white man, and his purpose is not to make money. He deliberately wiped it very carefully so that he can hear the other person waiting, the commercial secrets in his mouth. After the guest left, he immediately took out the notebook from his pocket. What he really wants is these precious financial knowledge because his dream is to become a banker. But his father is a little sad. Tell him that this dream is impossible to achieve. Because this is the United States of America in 1939, white people will not allow black people to make money in their way. The boy understands the facts in his father's mouth, but his eyes are full of indomitable will. 15 years later, the former shoe wiper has been married. He moved to Los Angeles with his wife and children because the racial discrimination here is a little lighter. So he chose to start a business here. The wife did not complain, give him the greatest support and encouragement. He started with the real estate economy. Through keen observation, he found that the black community was full of people. There are many empty houses in the white community, but no landlord is willing to rent to black people. This is a huge business opportunity. He soon moved to a white apartment adjacent to the black community. He found the landlord on the same day. The landlord offered $35,000. The hero didn't have that much money, so he proposed a plan to the landlord to sell it to him for $30,000. After he received the rent, he would give him $5,000 more on the original basis. Although I appreciate the mind of the black man in front of me, but the landlord didn't want to do a risky business. The hero understood. Before leaving, his eyes were suddenly attracted by the calendar. It said that the gift was from a bank manager. See these words, a bold idea appears in his mind. He said goodbye to the landlord and came to the bank where the manager was, but the manager's secretary disliked the black man very much, don't want to introduce him. He stood at the door of the bank and waited until the evening. See the manager walk out of the bank. He hurried up and said, "I know your big customer. The current business I want to do will benefit him, and I hope you can give me a loan." The manager eventually refused him. The man returned home a little sad. The wife sat by the side to comfort. At this time, the phone suddenly rang. When he learned that the male protagonist secretly used his name to apply for a loan, he not only did not blame him, but admired the male protagonist's determination to do everything possible to achieve his goal. He asked the male protagonist to go to the bank to apply for a loan tomorrow, and he would be the guarantor. The male protagonist successfully bought the building and quickly started to renovate it, but was dissatisfied by a white tenant. She asked the male protagonist to notify the landlord, saying that no matter how luxurious the decoration was, he would not raise her rent. But when she heard that the male protagonist was the landlord, the old lady was shocked and determined that the male protagonist was definitely lying. Not long after, the police suddenly came to the door. He said to the male protagonist that someone reported that you pretended to be the landlord to do decoration. The male protagonist said that he was indeed the owner of this house. The other party laughed at him with disgust. The male protagonist had to take out the copy of the real estate certificate he carried with him and handed it to one of the police officers for inspection. After looking at it, he handed it to his companion. After careful comparison, he found that the house was indeed the male protagonist's. The two could only leave unwillingly. That night, the male protagonist returned to the apartment building with a desk lamp in his hand. The mean old lady at the door saw it, scolded him loudly to leave. Now is not the time for renovation. The male protagonist calmly replied, "You are talking about the workers, and I am the owner of this house." The old lady looked incredible after hearing this. The next day, she deliberately pretended to be arrogant and got on the van of the moving company with her ridiculous self-esteem and vanity. Not long after the old lady left, the male protagonist rented her room to a black woman. When the contract was signed, he would show up as a white man. After the deal was successful, the rent would be halved. The owner agreed. The two of them quickly took action, one inside and one outside. Soon after, they made a lot of money. The owner changed the house for his family and saw the smile on his wife's face. The owner thought it was all worth it. But not long after, the old landlord suddenly died that night. All the assets were inherited by his wife, but this widow is not as wise as the old landlord. It is even more impossible for her to continue cooperating with the male protagonist because she severely discriminates against black people. So she proposed to buy the male protagonist's shares at a super low price and threatened the male protagonist, saying that if he disagrees, then he can sue her. Will the judge let a black person win the case? The male protagonist's slightly frowned brows contain unspeakable anger. Facing the unfairness of this society, he does not want to give in easily and is determined to fight with this woman, so he wants to find the bank manager as a witness. However, the manager at this time was already the financial advisor of the mean widow. Of course, he chose to avoid meeting the manager. The male owner looked at the white man who kept moving around. A shocking, bold idea roared in his heart. Suppression eventually turned into a force of resistance. He wants to buy this whole building and let all the banks in it serve him. He found a famous real estate agent in Los Angeles and told him his plan. He wants to know the latest situation in the real estate market. The best place is inside the bank. Buy that building, and it's equivalent to directly penetrating 12 banks. Not only that, once you become the owner of the building, the next bank will refuse your loan. You have to think twice. Joel was shocked by this idea. Although he is a rich man, he is also subject to the white man. He thought about it carefully. He thought this plan was possible. Not only can it make his career go up a level, but it can also step on the white man's bank home. He decided to cooperate with the male owner. But they are black after all. They can't make a deal directly. Otherwise, no matter how rich they are, they can't succeed. So they need a white man who can help them. For this, the male owner already had a suitable candidate in mind. That is, Matthew, the worker who helped him renovate the house. Matthew was very ambitious and never discriminated against black people. So the male protagonist and Joel began to package him, teaching him how to play golf, table manners, and financial knowledge. After a period of training, Matthew has basically mastered these contents. Now there is only the most difficult negotiation skill left. It is difficult to learn 3 in a short time. As well as the valuation of the building and a series of figures to use, the other party has nothing to say. There will always be managers from different banks who come over to shake hands with him. The manager who once looked down on him was stupid when he saw this scene. The acquisition of valuable houses in all over 177 breaks the strict division of black and white districts in Los Angeles, and many black people live in communities where white people can live. Their entrepreneurial stories quickly spread throughout Los Angeles. Even the vice president came to visit their buildings. A few years later, the male protagonist returned to his hometown with his family. His father was proud of his achievements. He took his son for a walk on the street. He took off his glasses and a shocking plan came to his mind. He wants to buy this bank, so that the loan is no longer the exclusive right of the white people. So as soon as he returned to Los Angeles, he approached Joel to discuss the matter. Joel was firmly opposed to it because his hometown of Texas was the area with the most serious racial discrimination in the country. The male protagonist naturally understood this truth, but he was still determined to give it a try because he had been through the rain before. He wanted to use his current energy to hold an umbrella for the black people there. Seeing that the male protagonist had made up his mind, Joel had to sacrifice his life to accompany the gentleman. In order to ensure that everything was foolproof, Joel invited his friends to assist him. In this way, Continental Bank successfully became their possession. After taking over, the male protagonist immediately changed the bank's policy and allowed black people to have the power of loans. He went to the door to find high-quality customers, helped them renovate old shops, and added work equipment for them. Seeing that many black people's careers were gradually getting better, the male protagonist smiled with relief, but the good times did not last long. The second largest shareholder of the bank discovered the clues because the loan approval rate for black people was 100%. He asked Matthew what was going on. Matthew certainly wouldn't tell the truth, so the second shareholder secretly followed him and found out that the male protagonist was the real boss of the bank. Upon learning that he was working for a black person, the second shareholder felt ashamed and resentful. He decided to bring them down and take over. It wasn't long before the protagonist and his associates received a letter from the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, informing them that their bank's financial records would be audited in 2 weeks. This gave Matthew a chance to prove himself, not to the protagonist and Joel, but to his wife. Since he and his wife had moved from Los Angeles to work there, their life had changed significantly. To compensate Matthew, the protagonist paid him a salary 5 times higher than what he earned in Los Angeles, but Matthew's wife was still dissatisfied. She felt embarrassed in front of her friends because Matthew was just an employee, so she egged him on, hoping he could become a boss. Matthew cared about his image in front of his wife, so he kept this in mind. Now that Continental Bank was facing a crisis, Matthew suggested buying another bank so they could transfer all the black deposits from Continental Bank before the audit. It seemed like a good idea, but the protagonist saw many risks and knew he and Joel couldn't manage another bank. At this point, Matthew proposed that after acquiring Marlin Bank, he would manage it entirely, making the operation possible. The protagonist sighed deeply because he knew Matthew wasn't capable of managing a bank alone, and he gently rejected the idea. But Matthew was not willing to give up and even threatened to resign and return to Los Angeles. Joel got angry, but considering Matthew had been with them for so long, he couldn't bear to let him leave. Helplessly, they agreed to acquire Marlin Bank and let him manage it alone. The crisis at Continental Bank was thus resolved. However, soon after, problems arose at Marlin Bank. Due to his lack of experience, Matthew was tricked by the second shareholder and the lawyer into signing a non-compliant document. Soon, the auditors from the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency came looking for him. Matthew hastily made an appointment for an inspection, saying they would come in a few hours to check the accounts. Matthew panicked and immediately called the protagonist to inform him of the situation. The protagonist sensed something was wrong. He knew this wasn't a coincidence and that Matthew wouldn't be able to handle it on his own. So, he disguised himself as a janitor and entered Marlin Bank. While the auditors were checking the accounts, he stood behind the glass, instructing Matthew on how to respond to their questions. However, this cheating tactic was quickly noticed. The auditor shut the office door, making it impossible for the protagonist to hear the conversation. Without the protagonist's help, Matthew was clueless. The auditor, seeing his bewilderment, had to explain the violations to him. In the end, they found over a dozen irregularities in the loans. When Matthew informed the protagonist, he was stunned, as he had checked each loan himself and couldn't believe there were any issues. Joel then asked, "Who did you ask to find a lawyer? Florence, the second shareholder?" It was clear that the second shareholder had swapped the collateral loans. Given the current dire situation, the best course of action was to abandon Marlin Bank. But Matthew didn't want to return to being an employee. He wanted to continue being a boss to maintain his image in his wife's eyes. The next day, Joel received unbelievable news. His friend called to tell him that Marlin Bank had paid off its debts and regained solvency. Joel laughed in disbelief, thinking no one would be foolish enough to buy those bad loans at face value. But when he heard the buyer was Continental Bank, he was furious and quickly went to confront Matthew with the protagonist. What Matthew had done was illegal. It was fraudulent, but it was too late. The auditors not only shut down Continental Bank but also arrested the protagonist and Joel. Years of hard work vanished in an instant. At the hearing, Matthew shifted all the blame onto the protagonist and Joel. Meanwhile, the protagonist and Joel faced two choices: plead guilty and lose only Continental Bank, or speak freely and risk imprisonment and losing all their assets in Los Angeles. Before going to court, the protagonist removed the glasses he always wore to suppress his anger. He had been rational all his life, but this time he decided to act on emotion. Soon after the hearing, all of the protagonists and Joel's properties were seized by the government, and they were sentenced to 3 years in prison for misusing bank funds. The day the male protagonist left the prison, his wife told him that we have nothing, but the male protagonist and Joel smiled at each other, and the two began to rebuild their financial resources in the Bahamas, and once again joined hands to create each other's careers. Though the lonely resistors couldn't withstand the dark tide, their spirits continued to shine brightly. Thanks for watching. Subscribe and like the video to help our channel out.